like we are approaching the limits of x86 advancement.
Keep that in your copy-paste list. That way you can post it every year, and someday you'll be right.
Wake up call! This already happened 10 years ago, since the performance advancement slowed down significantly. But thing is that it's also less important than the 90s era, this giant where we really needed the software advancement. Now not that much anymore.
Let's assume you have expertise to make a claim that x86 instruction sets are a limitation. What is it about the x86 instruction set that is the limitation?
Well, good question. Good question indeed, Fernandad208. I hope I didn't butcher your name. Also, my boy VogOnP4287, thank you for the wonderful video idea. I'm not sure if you're subscribed or if you're going to be watching this video, but you gave me some quality content today, and I appreciate that greatly. But what about his question, Fernandad208? What is it about x86 that is a limitation? And is x86 in danger of dying? Is x86 going to soon go the way of the dodo? I mean, I think it's a good question. So I actually found this article. I thought it was pretty interesting. ARM versus x86 instruction sets, architecture, and all key differences explained. I'm going to link this in the description. You should give it a read. But basically, ARM and x86 are two different CPU instruction sets. And this is basically the language that feeds your CPU, the code. It's basically how your CPU can interpret the code of the software. Because software is not written in instruction sets, but is written in code, and that code gets turned to the instruction set that interprets it. It says here that traditionally x86 targets performance and ARM targets efficiency. Now, this is what I always hear. ARM's so efficient. x86 just guzzles power, and it's not going to work long term. Eventually, x86 isn't going to be anymore. The only thing that's keeping ARM back is all the legacy programs that is built on 86, and that's holding it back from actually becoming the main instruction set on desktop. Now, this article was also very interesting, and I think it better explains, but that one gave us kind of like a history of x86. It gives pictures, and hey, I like pictures. They make understanding easier. But as you can see here, ARM is built on a RISC instruction set. That stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computer, and that only handles one instruction set per clock cycle. So it can just do like one thing per clock cycle. Now, you have to understand that it's in the gigahertz of a clock cycle, so there's going to be a lot of things it's still doing within 1 second. And the x86 processor, that's built on the CISC instruction set, and that is complex instruction set computer. This can execute many and multiple instruction sets per clock cycle. And the idea is that RISC takes the same, it uses less instructions to do the same amount of work as CISC or x86. So an ARM processor like Apple's M series would actually take less instructions to do the same amount of work as an x86 processor. And generally that's actually true. And that's the reason that they have such an efficiency advantage. Now, it talks about here that x86 was originally only limited to 32-bit, and it's crazy, but somehow this only had a limit of 4 gigabytes of memory, like DDR memory. And back in the day when they were making that, they're like, oh, 4 gigabytes is a huge amount. Like, we'd never need more than that. I'm sure that's what they're thinking. Sometime later, I think this was in the 80s or into the 90s, they upgraded the architecture to x64, and that's basically 64-bit. So x86 is now called x86-64. And this allows it to get a huge memory bump to a maximum of 18.4 exabytes. So I think they realized at that point, they're like, oh, we're going to need more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. We're probably going to even need more than 100, gigabytes of RAM. Let's just make it max 18.4 exabytes. So just to give you an idea how much that is. It's just... So to put that in perspective, a gigabyte is, what is this? 100,000 million, 1 billion bytes. A gigabyte's 1 billion bytes. An exabyte is just an unfathomable amount of number of bytes. Or you could think of it as 1,000 petabytes. I don't even know what a petabyte is. I think it's 1,000 terabytes. So yeah, we are not going to reach this limit anytime soon. And I think this is the limit on one system. So it is definitely going to be a non-issue for a little while. So this article goes over a few different categories here, like which is best in memory capacity. And the original x86 could only go up to 4 gigabytes, so it is just garbage. And that one loses, but the updated x86 that we all use can go up to that huge number, and ARM can go up to a huge number, and they both have not even reached close to the amount of RAM capacity they can use. So those are both okay there. The winner is a tie. They're both winning. Processing power. You know, ARM can do pretty much a PC can do, but it's usually slower due to battery and system limitations. Doesn't really give a reason why, but it's saying x64 is the most dominant CPU architecture. And honestly, I think that the processing power of x86 is better, mostly because of that legacy software base. You're running everything natively. It's built for x86. You can do multiple instruction sets all at once. And people that buy x86 aren't scared to push that power, and that's going to give you more performance. Now, this is the big talking point. Power consumption. Everyone knows Apple products are super efficient. They sip power. Many people say that's because they're on ARM. So due to the reduced instruction set of ARM, like I said, it can do the same work with less operations. Now, this is going to require you to do more optimization around your code, but doing that, it makes it more efficient. So you're going to get the same amount of work done in less instruction sets. You're going to have to translate less of those instruction sets to the CPU. And overall, that's going to use less energy. And there's really nothing x86 can do to compete with that. There are a few things x86 has been trying, and we can talk about that in a moment. So yeah, due to ARM being more efficient, the cooling requirements are a lot more modest for ARM usually, and that lowers the overall cost for ARM product. It's actually going to be much cheaper to license ARM than x86. So it's going to allow for higher profit margins and more revenue. So most modern companies that are building a chip are going with ARM because of this reason and the power efficiency. I know that people are going to say in the comments is risc-v, and that's reduced instruction set computing that is open source, and it's fully open sourced, not opposed to ARM, which is owned by a specific company. Now ARM does allow, it has like a semi open source nature where it will allow like companies like Apple to modify the instruction sets based on their needs. And that's another huge leg up that ARM has on x86, because number one, if you wanted to make an x86 chip, you basically couldn't, because Intel and AMD are just not going to let anybody in. And number two, they would surely not let you change any of the instruction sets about it. And you would basically have to be building it how they want you to build it, and not based on your own needs and desires for your own chip. ARM definitely has a leg up there, and RISC is even better than that because it's just totally open source. You're not going to have as much fees. I don't even know if it has any fees. Like, it's basically just like, yep, we love building computers. We love building chips. You can do it too. And it's probably going to be a lot harder to do it on RISC because there's going to be less like guidance. Like on something like ARM or x86, you're going to have like a strong background and code base to work with. But on this, you're going to be building from the ground up basically. So you just have to pick your poison here, and they all have their own benefits. So it's kind of funny because the people in the x86 space, like Intel's VP of technical marketing, he's just saying like, nah, this is all fake news, man. Like ARM, it's not any more efficient than x86. Just let us show you with our Lunar Lake processor. We're going to knock the pants off of these ARM guys, like the Snapdragon chip that just came out. And I don't know, it seems a little bit like cope to me. Like you got to admit that ARM, like it has reduced instruction sets. Like it's going to get like the little tasks done more efficient than x86. And that's just how it is. But Intel is saying this isn't the case. And I've heard people from AMD kind of say this as well. So maybe we don't know. Maybe everyone else in the world is just oblivious to this fact. I have no idea. Robert Halleck is saying, it's our firm belief that the ongoing conversations around ARM versus the x86 power are based on a false premise, because it is not the instruction set architecture, ISA, that broadly dictates power. Our view is a physical one: transistors cost power. A CPU design that adds core counts, increases NPU size, increases graphic size, or adds fabric complexity is not free. These decisions intrinsically raise package power consumption and TDPs into a ballpark what consumers historically see from conventional Windows /Linux processors. Basically, in other words, implementing the features and performance in the market expects has a typical cost regardless of x86 or ARM ISA. So basically, complexity costs power on any ISA. Then it becomes a battle between which set of design choices yields the best performance per power per area or PPA. Yeah, he's coping a little bit here. He's like, it's Lunar Lake, man. Lunar Lake's gonna knock the socks off him. It's not x86, it's not ARM that determines power. It's the physical design of the chip, the floor plan of the chip, the process technology being used. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's right. Like, that's probably gonna make the biggest difference is like, what node are you on, and then what OS are you running, and how are you using your hardware, right? That's gonna make the biggest difference in battery life. But at the same time, when every battery percentage counts, ARM may have a leg up on x86, and him not admitting this, I don't know. I want to see what Lunar Lake can do, that's all I'm gonna say. It even says Jim Keller suggested that any architecture could be pretty power efficient. However, this changes with time. Also, something I haven't talked about is x86 is like a super old instruction set, came out in the 70s, and basically so much of x86 is like built around supporting the past, and that makes it a little bit more bloated. It's a much larger instruction set, and because it has to be backwards compatible, it makes it less efficient. You can build a PC from like a long time ago, like 20 years ago, and run stuff today, and that's because of the backwards compatibility. Or you could build a modern PC and run programs from 15 years ago. That's kind of like what x86 is built around. Me personally, on my desktop machine, I am totally fine with consuming a little bit more power and generating more heat if I get to maintain all of the compatibility and performance of my system. Now, I'm making this video at the perfect time actually, because there's leaks actually of ARM, like the entity ARM, making a discrete GPU, or I don't know if it's discrete or integrated, but they're making a graphics processing unit to compete with Nvidia. And this is crazy. Like, now what I'm confused about is I thought ARM was like a CPU architecture. I didn't think GPUs, it didn't matter if it was built on either one, because I thought they didn't have this, but I could be wrong. Let me know in the comments. Maybe it's just the company building a GPU and it's not built on ARM, if that makes sense. But basically, yeah, I mean, ARM's got a ton of money. I would welcome a new GPU manufacturer into the scene. We need somebody to spank Nvidia hard. Intel is not going to do it anytime soon, and AMD never wanted to. AMD always would just follow Nvidia's lead and price their cards 10% less. And for some reason, people will still buy their cards for that, even though they're way worse. Even though they're way worse, they'll just buy them for 10% less and save like $50 and get half performance in anything other than rasterized gaming. But I digress. This is pretty cool. People have some comments about this. They're saying more competition equals better. I wish them the best. Cool. Not a chance. Nothing but garbage integrated video chips will come out of this. ARM is not near the powerful silicon entity Intel and AMD and Nvidia are. And look at the effect Intel has taken to even get their foot in the door. But gaming, ARM doesn't have the money. ARM struggles just to keep their CPU architecture up to date. They don't have the resources to start building a gaming GPU from scratch. So it looks like the sentiment, at least of these nerds on this forum, is that this isn't going to be the game changer we think it is. So maybe it's not worth getting excited about. Now, something that is worth getting excited about is there's rumors, and this came out in May, So you might have heard this before. There hasn't been any other developments on it, but some insiders have been talking about this rumor that Nvidia is planning an ARM CPU. It may have a GPU, ARM CPU, GPU combo, and it's built on one of Intel's nodes, maybe their 18A node. And yeah, that's very interesting. A CPU, a Nvidia CPU built by Intel. That's different. And hey, it would be ARM too. So if Nvidia goes to ARM and pioneers their code base there, I'd see many others following suit and abandoning x86, unfortunately. Especially PC gamers. PC gamers will follow Nvidia no matter where they go. I believe that wholeheartedly. Like, they really have to come out with a good solution for emulating games, because you aren't going to be able to go back and recode all the games that are out there. And I want to get emulation that's only like 10% worse performance. I don't want to split my performance in half. And that brings us to our next section, Snapdragon X Elite. Now, this is the newest laptop that has come out with ARM, and it's supposed to be like highest performance, longest battery life, like everything you need in the laptop. Just get this. Do never buy an Intel laptop again. Now, one of my favorite people, Gordon from PC World, he did like a deep dive 3 weeks ago. And this is 2 hours long about just this laptop. And the performance here, it's actually really good. It's right behind AMD and Intel's best in multi-core, and it's ahead of their Meteor Lake processor. Also, Linus tested the battery life on this, and it was top in the charts here with 14 hours of battery life, getting more than the Apple MacBook Pro M3. That's crazy, and it's totally destroying the Core Ultra 7 and Ryzen 7 by like 4 hours. Now, I thought that was interesting. A lot of Linus's benchmarks and stuff like totally favored the X Elite, and I looked on other channels and they weren't nearly as big of gaps. So I don't know what's going on there, if like some of his team is like paid off, or I mean, I don't think Linus would do anything, but maybe the people that are actually testing this, I have no idea, because like all the other videos I've seen, it hasn't been that big of a gap. Gordon tested battery life in like a real world scenario. I don't know what he was doing. I guess he was like watching videos or something, and he found that Meteor Lake had higher battery life. Now, it did have like a 50% bigger battery, so he also found that it had better battery life in his second test, and then he did a third test. And that last third test is when the Snapdragon won. And keep in mind that Snapdragon has the battery isn't as big. So if it's lasting longer, that means it's much more efficient than the 75 watt hour Core Ultra 7. Okay. Lastly, gaming, and this is what, a lot of us care about. There's a lot of people in my comments are like, man, I can't believe people play video games. Like, yeah, that's been a huge part of PCs and especially GPUs for a very long time. Basically, here in Linus's test, he was like, yeah, the X Elite is like beating AMD's and Intel's best in their laptops, like the APU solutions, until it doesn't, and the game is not supported and it has to be emulated. And when it's emulated, it's about half the performance, as you can see here. So, and this, as far as I understand, there's not a ton of games where it's like natively supported. So, in my opinion, ARM for gaming is a long ways away. We got to get better emulation support for those older games and higher performance. And yeah, I don't want to split my performance in half just so I can run ARM. That's not worth it to me. I'd rather just drain my battery a little bit faster and have complete compatibility. To answer the question, is x86 dead? Will x86 die eventually? To answer that question, I will have to say, I think that a more unified CPU instruction set and architecture is needed for technology going forward. I think that there is going to be a consolidation of CPU like microarchitecture. I think that will happen. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but I will say that I don't see people like Apple and Nvidia, once they go to ARM or a RISC architecture, to come back to a CISC architecture. I'll say that. I don't see someone jumping to ARM and coming back to x86 once they've done that work on compatibility and emulation. If I'd have to choose one or the other, I would say that eventually I don't know if it's 100 years from now or 10 years from now, we will have just one architecture, one micro, or one set of instructions. And, there's always going to be more than one, but I think there's going to be one main one. Like how there's Windows and Linux. A lot of people in the chat probably do use Linux, but generally, if you own a PC, you're going to be using Windows. Like 95% of people use Windows. So I think eventually there's going to be a consolidation of instruction sets, and that'll probably be like an ARM-like feature. And x86 will probably be on the decline for the next couple decades. And if I had to predict, now, me personally, am I going to be switching out my x86 machine for an ARM or RISC machine anytime soon? Heck no. Like I said, I want that compatibility. I don't care if I use more power, if I get that performance, especially on a desktop machine. I have a Mac M1 Air, and I can use that on the go and route into my x86 machine using TeamViewer, and that's what I like to do. But when I'm on the go, sure, I'll use a machine that is a little bit more efficient. Maybe it can't game, that's okay. But at home, when I'm on my desktop, when I'm plugged into the wall, I'm not giving up that compatibility. You're gonna have to rip it from my cold dead head.